Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Why You Should Play the Toho Games panel. Put more dryly, it's the Danmaku Shooting Games, a primary and FAQ panel. So this is a panel that I gave at Toho Fest 2023 on Saturday, April 29th. And I'm re-recording it because the equipment in the Toho Fest room was not so great, and it seems that no one got a recording of the panel when I was giving it. So I'm just making this kind of like director's cut version to upload to my channel, and hopefully to archive for anyone that wants to go back and watch it. Yeah, so here we go. First is about me. So I was exposed to Toho in 2006 or so by one of my siblings. And this was when Toho 6 and 7 were like shiny and new, right? So my earliest memories of Toho were watching or kind of peering over the shoulder of the sibling and watching her play PCB and EOSD. Though I kind of forgot about it, the series later, until 2015 was when I really got into the series as an actual fan. And I think this was due to the Twitch Plays Pokemon Tohomon controversy. If anyone knows about that, if you don't, just look it up. But from there, I got into playing the mainline games, got into playing lots of fan games. Both of these, by games and fan games, I mean Danmaku shooting games. I also do a lot of Chinese to English translation of Chinese fan works. For socials, the most relevant one is probably my YouTube channel, which is probably where you're watching this right now. And that's where I upload a lot of Danmaku shooting game gameplay, as well as some soundtrack uploads, usually from Chinese fan works. If you need to get a hold of me, please email this email address, and I'll try my best to respond. If you know what Mastodon is and you're a nerd, that's my handle. Otherwise, that is my Discord. Here are just some of the games that I remember the most of 6 and 7 because of my initial exposure to the series. 15 because I spent lots of time playing this when I first got into the Toho. And lastly, Fantastic Danmaku Festival Part 2, which was a game that I contributed official translations to. So my name's actually in the credits of that game, which is pretty cool. All right, so let's start by asking ourselves, why do we want to play the games? So Toho was born from its games and was inspired by past bullet hell shooting games. And the mainline games remain the vehicle through which Zune expresses himself. So he's stated before that his games are basically like his diary, like his journal of what he's feeling at a certain point in time, and that comes through the presentation of the characters, the character designs, the story, the music, and all the patterns. So it's a very integrated product. Next, I've honestly feel that Toho is not as difficult as people like to make it sound. Some people like to flex how hard Toho is to their friends, which kind of scares those friends off from playing, right? So there's lots of other harder skill games out there, and I feel like Toho is definitely not the hardest of them. And lastly, I kind of touched on this just previously, is that bullet patterns are really pretty, and a lot of the music tracks that Zune makes for his games are very tightly fit to the patterns, and just seeing the patterns together with the music in one cohesive product kind of amplifies the impact a lot. So if you think of your favorite Toho track, it probably is a lot better of an experience if you play it with the game. Just my opinion. Next, I'd like to go through some terminology. So what's an STG and what's bullet hell? So STG is short for a shooting game. You'll also hear it called a shmup or a shoot 'em up. And it's a very broad, diverse genre. There's lots of history. And the only kind of common binding characteristic is that you shoot enemies and you try to not get shot by the enemies. So Space Invaders by Taito in the 1970s is kind of widely regarded as the first STG, where these aliens just kind of like slowly move down the screen and you have to kill them all without getting shot by them in return. Now, Danmaku is a Japanese term that means bullet curtain, literally, and it's kind of an offshoot of the STG genre, popularized in the 90s, and it's characterized by large amounts of decorative bullets to make a pattern look more flashy. So at the time, where all these games were being presented at were arcades, right? So these arcades wanted people to come in and pay for tokens and like use their tokens on their games, right? And it's kind of, with that, it kind of incentivized them to make these games look as flashy as possible, and also to make them super difficult, so that you would spend more tokens trying to clear, right? Or credits, as they call them. And making these patterns flashy is also a sort of way to get bystanders hooked in, right? Like you're walking in the arcade and you walk by this random person that's just like going ham on this crazy, complicated bullet pattern STG, and you'll think like, hey, I kind of want to do that too, right? So that's where kind of Danmaku and bullet hell kind of spawned from. So here's an example from the extra stage of Touhou 8 Imperishable Night that kind of demonstrates the concept I just mentioned. Oops, let's set it to high quality. So as you can tell, these blue wings are pretty much useless, right? The only threat in this pattern to my character is this laser and maybe 3 lanes of the red bullets. All the other red bullet lanes and all the blue bullets are basically useless in decoration. Well, they're not useless, but they're decoration, and it just serves to make the pattern more thematic, more fancy, and just prettier to look at. All right. Next, I'd like to talk briefly about getting the games. So we're in a world that's increasingly AI, art, music, everything, like AI essay, everything is like AI generated nowadays, right? And in such an environment, supporting creators is especially important. So I wanted to dedicate some time to talk about where to get the games. So for Touhou 9 and onwards, it's very easy. They're all on Steam. You can go and just buy them on Steam. They're pretty cheap. And yeah, for 6 through 8, it's a bit more difficult because Zune lost the source code, so you can't put them on Steam. And for those, you will have to import the physical CDs to get a copy of those games. I have had personally good experience with Akiba Hobby for importing Zune's music CDs, and I know that the games are also on sale there, so I would, it's a +1 for that site. As for PC98, the games are not officially on sale anymore, so it's actually not possible to get them anymore unless you're buying them secondhand. Also, these games were kind of from a different era. They're kind of more janky, and they don't run on modern PC hardware without emulation, so there's lots of problems, and I would not recommend a beginner get started on those games. Next, I'd like to talk about equipment needed to play the Touhou games. So first, you need a PC running Windows. Anything from the past 8 years or so will run a mainline game perfectly fine. If you want to record your gameplay or you're playing fan games that are more demanding, you'll probably need something newer. But as a baseline, anything from the past 8 years should work. Next, you need an input device. So the classical input device for STGs is the arcade stick. You might have seen them in arcades. It's like left hand on the joystick and right hand on like 6 buttons. That's kind of the way they were traditionally played, but it's kind of a high startup cost to get into. So I would recommend that you don't do this for now. And if you get interested in SCGs and Danmaku games later, you can kind of look into that on your own. So I recommend everyone is to use a keyboard. So keyboards are ubiquitous. Everyone has one. You do not need a mechanical keyboard, despite what some people will tell you. Anything that does not hurt your fingers and you can play on, should work. Some people also use controllers. Support is generally good in the mainline games. What you can do is configure the bindings in game and also in the config.exe, which is located beside the game program. Next, I'd like to discuss what game I recommend people start with and what difficulty. So good first game, this one. And you might be thinking, what in the hell is that? This game is called Barrage Musical Basic Danmaku Tutorial. It's a short $2 Steam game. And what it does is it teaches you the basics from no shmup experience at all until ready to take on your first easy Touhou game. So it's basically 17 short tutorial scenes where there's a bit of teaching and material or information, and then you get a small exercise attack to kind of use what you've just been taught. So it's very short. You can probably clear it within a couple hours at most, but it's a very, very good starter, I think. It's not Touhou, but it's made by a very well-known Touhou fan game developer, Saywell. So I really, really do recommend everyone that's trying to get into the Touhou games, to buy this game first and kind of play through it. Anyways, so back to what you wanted to see, good first Touhou game. I have two recommendations, and that would be Mountain of Faith and Hidden Star in Four Seasons. So Touhou 10 Mountain of Faith, its system is very simple and easy to understand. And the other reason I recommend it is that it has a very short running time. So a full run of Mountain of Faith takes only 22 minutes, whereas a lot of the other mainline games are closer to 28 to 30 minutes. And that's one thing that might be difficult for beginners to get started with, is kind of endurance. So like the game gets harder and harder as you keep going, and towards the end, it's easy to kind of get like mentally tired or exhausted, and a shorter game will kind of ease you into that more. As for Touhou 16, it has a very interesting season subshot and release system. So there are 4 characters, and you can pair them up with 4 seasons, and each season has a kind of release system that works differently from the other seasons. And I think this game is a very good one, where you learn how to learn a specific game system, because like each release behaves differently, and you it kind of is good to encourage experimentation. Like, how does this character in this season play? Do I like playing with that combo, or do I like playing with one of the other 15 combinations? Yeah, and it's just a very fun game to use releases on to get through in general. Now, for the elephant in the room, what difficulty? So I have some facts for everyone. It is 2023, indeed it is. The easy mode meme is 17 years old. It's going to be of age next year. This is like a 2006 meme that probably predates all of y'all's and mine, our fandom. So it's time to let it rest, right? I recommend everyone start at easy and work your way up, like just as you clear lower difficulties and you feel like you've gotten a better grasp of the game, try challenging a higher difficulty. The reason, like, I feel like, I hope this doesn't need to be like said, but I'll say it anyways, is that our communities are already so niche that I don't think like the sort of gatekeeping with like easy mode meme and like looking down on people for that is productive or useful. We should be welcoming everyone to come play the games. Yeah. So next, I'd like to talk a bit about the game format and appearance. This is because like a lot of times beginners boot up the game and they enter the game, and all of a sudden you get bombarded with information. So there's the main screen with all the bullets and enemies, and on the right there's like tons of numbers and HUDs and gauges and everything. So it's very hard to, or it's easy to get overwhelmed. So I like to kind of break that down before you go into it. So the game format, describing the mainline Touhou 6 through 18 games, excluding 9 and 19. You have a choice of 4 difficulties for the main scenario: easy, normal, hard, and lunatic. And the main scenario is 6 stages. And there's also an extra stage that is between normal and hard difficulty, depending on which game. And what is a stage? So a stage is a choreographed sequence of attacks from enemies, bullet attacks from the enemies. And it's often fit to the music. So it's kind of like choreographed, as I mentioned. It can include a mid-boss, so sometimes the boss character comes in for a bit during the stage and then they leave again and there's more of the stage. And at the end of the stage you will fight a boss, which is one of the Touhou characters. And the boss, what they will do is that they will throw an assortment of non-spell and spell card attacks at you, which are patterns you must dodge and defeat by shooting. So here I have a screenshot of the last spell of Mountain of Faith. There's a health bar at the top here, and you're supposed to shoot down the spell until it's depleted. So non-spells are normal attacks. They're unnamed and usually easier or more plain, whereas spell cards, as you see here, are named, thematically relevant. They're often prettier or fancier, and if you shoot it down completely without getting hit or bombing, it's called a capture of the spell, and that yields a score bonus. So each spell is usually preceded by a non-spell, though not always. Sometimes later in a boss fight or later in the game, you'll have 2 spell cards in a row or something like that. Next, I like to describe the game UI, the basics of the game UI. So first, we have the playing field here on the left. That's where your character is here, and all of the enemies that you'll see. So let's focus first on the HUD on the right. So here is the high score in the score, which is pretty self-explanatory. Next is your remaining lives, each represented by a heart. So this is the lives you have, the extra lives you have left. So once this gets to 0, you can get hit one more time, and then it's game over. Next is the number of bombs or spell cards you have. So in Touhou, there's a special that you can trigger by pressing X, and it usually confers invulnerability and clears the screen of bullets, and this kind of represents how many you have. So this here means you can press X 3 times to trigger this special attack. Next, we have power. So your shot starts off pretty weak, and you collect these red P items from the game, and you'll gradually power up. You'll also lose some of this after every death, so it's just a part of Touhou's system. Next is the point item value. So these blue squares are point items, and you collect them and they add score. The higher you collect them, the more points they're worth, and this number tells you the maximum value that they are worth at the top of the screen. Next is the graze counter. So graze is when a bullet kind of passes by your hitbox without actually hitting you, and that counter is here. Now, if we look at the game field, one more important thing to note is this line called the item get borderline, or the point of collection. So normally these red and blue items, they are dropped by these fairies and they just kind of fall down and off the screen. And you have to catch them by hand, right? And what moving above this line does is that it automatically collects all items on screen into your character. And because it's at the top of the screen, you kind of have to know ahead of time or be careful or weigh the risk and reward of going up there when there's potentially enemies near you to collect all the items. Next, there's some changes that happen when you have a boss fight. So here we have Eternity's non-spells. So you see the bosses on the screen and they have a health bar around them in a circle. The name of the boss is up here. And also there's a timer here in the middle. So every pattern has a time limit that you need to defeat it within. If you run out of time, the boss will just skip to the next pattern. But if it's a spell card, it will count as a failed capture. Here it's kind of faint, but you can also see there's a red marker at the bottom of the screen. Sometimes the boss's attacks kind of pin you at the bottom of the screen, and you don't have the time or attention to look all the way up at the boss to see where they are. So this marker helps you locate where they are left and right horizontally. Finally, you can see what happens when the boss casts a spell card. So the background changes. The boss gets this thin white spell circle. And you can see the name of the spell at the top and the spell bonus, and also the history of how many times you captured the spell versus how many times you faced the spell. Right, so that's it for the basic aesthetics of the UI. So each game is a bit different. So consult the manual of the game that you're playing to see the particulars for the specific game. Next, I'd like to talk about the controls and general technique. So the controls for keyboard in Touhou, you have the arrow keys, which move you around. You have shift, which when held puts you in focus mode. What focus mode does is you move slower, and it also makes your hitbox visible. Z is to shoot enemies. You kind of have to hold it down to repeatedly fire. And X, as I mentioned before, is to trigger a bomb. Depending on the game, C may also have a special effect, though in Mountain of Faith here, it does not have an effect. So here I have a visualizer called TH Input made by Drake, which kind of attaches to a running Touhou game and shows all the inputs that are flowing in. So here I just have a basic demo of the controls on Mountain of Faith Stage 1. So here we have the arrow keys, up, down, left, right. Pretty simple. Here I'm pressing Z, and I'm shooting and killing these fairies. Soon you'll see me press Shift, this square. And what that will do is that shows my hitbox, and I also move slower. So here I'm demonstrating some fast movement, unfocused, and if I press Shift, I move slower. You can also see me moving above the point of collection to collect all the falling items. Here we have mid-boss Aki. You also see me bomb momentarily by pressing X. And there we go. And that confers me short invincibility and deals damage to the boss. Yep. Pretty simple. So next, some general tips. A lot of times I see beginners flail too much. So they make excessive movements when they don't need to. And the rationale behind not flailing or not moving too much is this. So basically dodging is a function of you taking in your current position and the position and velocity of all bullets on screen and kind of making a judgment, where do I go next, right? If you keep moving yourself when you don't have to, you kind of constantly have to update this judgment over and over, right? And that kind of creates a lot of extra load on cognitively. So especially on lower difficulties, easy and normal, I would highly recommend don't move unless you have to, unless you want to go shoot something or you're about to get hit. And just try to be more calm in your movement. I'll touch on this later, but another thing is knowing when to use focus mode. So if you're holding shift down for like 100% of the duration of the game, or vice versa, you're probably doing it wrong. There's different scenarios throughout the game in which you'll have to move at focused or unfocused speed. Next, you need to use your bombs proactively. So Touhou has a death bombing system where if you press X within 8 frames of getting hit, you'll actually negate the death and trigger a bomb. But a common misconception is that you can death bomb or do this 8-frame window on reflex. That's actually impossible. 8 frames at 60 FPS is completely out of the capabilities of human reflexes. And what you actually need to do is plan ahead where you want to bomb, and bomb well ahead of when you think you might get hit. So Yatsuzume, a well-known survival Touhou player, has a video about death bombing and this fallacy of kind of doing it on reflex. So if you're interested, I would just look up on YouTube Yatsuzume death bombing. It's a very helpful video. Finally, I would say this kind of goes along with bombing, but if the game has a special system, make use of it, right? These games are balanced around their special system. And oftentimes you'll see a lot of high-level players do like no bomb, no whatever, no trance limitations on themselves, and that's because they've already mastered the game, right? If you're kind of starting out, you should play the game as its balance was intended, and that means making use of all the systems and resources available to you. So here I just have a clip, a very contrived example of what happens if you don't use your bombs proactively from Touhou 14. So notice that I have full bombs, 8 bombs in stock. That's a lot. Each bomb can pretty much skip an attack if you keep in mind. And now what you'll see is that I die right there. And that resets me from 8 bombs all the way back to 3, the default whenever you die. And what that means is that was 8 attacks that I could have skipped for each of the 8 bombs that I kind of wasted, right? And that could be the difference between clearing healthily or game overing at the beginning of like stage 6 or something, right? So I hope this contrived example kind of convinces you that you need to be bombing proactively and try to never die with bombs in stock. Next, I'd like to comment a bit on commonly encountered bullet patterns. So another thing that beginners often believe is that Touhou players kind of look at the entire screen and make judgments based on every bullet in isolation, every individual bullet. We look at it and we're like, okay, this one, this one, this one, this one, for every bullet on screen. And that's not true. So bullet patterns are often composed of multiple smaller or simpler bullet patterns. And each of those like smaller components have their own ways of being resolved or handling them. And so like playing the game is kind of recognizing these patterns and handling them. So first kind is random. So the most prominent example of this is Eternal Meek in Touhou 6, stage 6 mid-boss spell, which is simply just random spam. Random direction, I think a bit of random speed as well. Overall, just an RNG spell. And these patterns are a test of your visual reading and on-the-fly dodging. Depending on if you like that, this can be fun or not. But in general, these patterns are not super pretty or fun if overused. So you often see this combined with other types of patterns to kind of augment the difficulty of that other pattern. Next, we have a very important concept, which is aimed patterns. So you can have bullets that are aimed around you. They are used to restrict your movement. So you're not in direct risk of these bullets because they're not aimed at your hitbox. but they're used to prevent you from moving too widely. So when you see these, it's okay to stay where you are, but beware of other bullets from other components, right? The other kind of aimed bullets are those that are aimed directly at your hitbox. And what you want to do is just sidestep, right? Like if someone's going to shoot at you, just move to the right or left and let the bullet pass by you. So a pattern that demonstrates this very well is Youmuu's non-spells. So you can see here, blue is aimed at me, red around, blue aimed at me, red around. Right, so for blue, let's play that again. For blue, I sidestep, and then I stay still for red. Sidestep, stay still. Alright, so another thing that you'll see happen is that enemies will continuously fire bullets aimed at you. And when that happens, you'll want to repeatedly sidestep slowly, inching along. And this is a technique that's called streaming. And streaming is one of the most important techniques I'll talk about today. It's probably like if you don't remember anything else, you need to remember that you need to learn streaming. And another problem that comes up is what happens when you hit the edge of the screen, right? Because like if you keep sidestepping, you can't go on forever. You're just going to hit that edge of the screen. And what you need to do is execute a technique called a restream. And what that means is before you hit the edge of the screen, you want to pull over to the edge of the screen and then start moving the other way. And that might sound a bit abstract or vague. So here's an example from Barrage Musical Basic Danmaku tutorial. Oops, sorry about that. So you'll see the enemy will repeatedly fire at me, and I repeatedly sidestep. But before I get to the edge of the screen, I kind of pull over to the edge of the screen. What this does is it forces the boss's aiming to switch very quickly or sharply from where I was to where I am now at that edge of the screen. And then it pulls out a gap for me to start going the other way. So look how, see how big of a gap has been pulled out here because of my restream. And this happens very, very, very often in Touhou, and especially other kinds of STGs or Danmaku STGs as well. So as I mentioned, this is a technique that's very well worth learning and mastering. And a lot of times, when you see a foreign pattern in a stage or something, if you're seeing something new for the first time and you don't know how to handle it, a very good fallback is to just start tap streaming. Just start streaming and seeing, hey, are things going past me because they were aimed at my prior position? Okay, then that is an aimed streaming pattern, and I should be streaming and restreaming. Kind of going along with that is the technique of misdirection. So if you know something is aimed, you can intentionally position yourself to decrease the threat of those bullets. So here's an example from the extra fight of Touhou 18. I'd like you to kind of notice just the general density of the bullets around me. So let's say it looks like 15 to 20 bullets around me every wave here. I'm dodging at the bottom of the screen. And now you might realize that that the pattern was kind of aimed at me, right? So what if I just misdirect it? When the pattern fires, I go to the side and then go back to middle to dodge. Here I do it again, every wave. And then I want you to observe how many fewer bullets are around me that I have to handle. So now it's down to like 5 to 10, right? Kind of halved the amount of bullets I have to look at and dodge. So this is the technique in this direction. So there's other forms of streaming as well. So what was demonstrated earlier was horizontal left-right streaming. So there's also vertical streaming up and down, and circular streaming going in a circle. So here's a couple of examples from the Extra Fight of Touhou 15. Obviously here I can't go the full length of the screen up and down since Hikashia is right there in my way. But here the lasers are aiming at me. So what I can do is repeatedly sidestep up and down, but before I get to the edge of the screen I can kind of pull out another gap like I just did there. Vertical streaming. Next is circular streaming. This is one of Junko's extra spells. And here it's a very simple example where she's aiming at you, but she fires so quickly you can't do a horizontal restream. So you're kind of forced to go around her in a circle. It's a very simple example. Next, I kind of discuss two concepts called micro-dodging and macro-dodging. This refers to like the density of patterns and how we should handle them. So micro-dodging is kind of getting right into the thick of the bullets. So you're reading individual bullets and trying to dodge inside of them, basically. And these patterns are usually slower and denser. And you want to visually narrow your range of focus to be closer to your hitbox and the surrounding things because the bullets are denser and slower. So you kind of need that attention there. So an example of this is the final spell from Touhou 15 Stage 2. The bullets kind of all scatter around, and I'm dodging them individually as standalone bullets. I tend to be focused, so I can move slower and have more attention to where the dense bullets are going. In contrast, there's a pattern called macro dodging, which is kind of dodging entire groups of bullets at once. So instead of recognizing individual bullets, you kind of group everything together into larger components. So this usually happens for faster patterns. And because of that, you want to widen your visual range and use your peripheral vision. You don't want to be focused all the time or staring at your own character all the time. Often what will happen is if your character is down here, your visual focus is actually a bit above them, like around 2/3 of the way down the screen, and you use your peripheral vision to both read incoming bolts and also to move your character. So here's an example from Stage 4 of Touhou 11. This spell is aptly named Tengu Macro Burst. It's kind of a contrived example because you can't really go through these individual bullets, but it's a good demonstration of kind of bullets being grouped into a larger bullet. And you kind of dodge the larger group bullet at once. The next spell is also a good example of this. So you have these tornadoes that are made of these arrowheads. You might think like, how do I dodge through that, right? Well, it turns out you can just macro and go all the way around the tornado, and that kind of handles the entire thing. Right, so macro dodging is kind of knowing when to recognize these larger groups and handling them by like circling around the entire group, for example. Next, I'd like to touch upon the fact that every individual pattern kind of has its own quirks, tricks, and routes. And if you're into like the exploration and experimentation and discovery part of playing these games, a lot of people are. You might want to try figuring this out on your own. So a lot of spells are kind of like, aha, there's a eureka moment when you figure out the twist or trick to it. Or if you don't, you can go online and just look up how people handle certain spells or ask your friends or the community. But in general, a lot of patterns have these tricks that you want to learn. So one One example of this is a stage 6 spell from Touhou 14. I think this is Attack of Dwarf. So these orb bullets kind of activate and then chase after you after a while, and then you dodge them, and you also try to dodge these walls, right? It's kind of a lot to handle. These can get busy, you have to handle 2 things at once. But you might have noticed that the orbs kind of stop whenever you get near them. They also kind of stop when they move out of your range. So someone figured out if you just repeatedly go up and activate and deactivate the orbs, they just stay stuck there forever, right? And then the only thing you have to handle is the walls. And then the orbs are kind of neutralized. So that's just an example of like learning a trick to a pattern that makes it a lot easier. And I mentioned this, I'll talk about this later, but you want to plan out which patterns you want to capture or make an attempt at dodging in a full run. And you want to practice them to make sure you get consistent at them. Another thing to talk about is blind killers. So you might hear people complain sometimes about blind killers, which are patterns that kind of are certain to kill you the first time that you see them. And my opinion is that this is completely fine, right? So SCGs are meant to be played via practice and learning, and the process of kind of like repeatedly improving upon yourself and then finally getting that satisfying clear is part of the charm of SCGs. So attacks that can be defeated blind, quote, or like the first time you see them offer little depth to the learning process, as they're less rewarding to beat. You just kind of play it once and then you're like, okay, done, right? There's no like iterative learning process. And this kind of applies to games as a whole as well. So don't be scared of difficulty is what the point of this is. So one example I thought of for a blind killer was the extra survival spell in Touhou 12. Survival spells often fall into this category because you can't bomb your way through them. Survival spells are where you have to wait for the timer to deplete to 0. So like this sort of spell, the fireballs move in a very weird pattern if you've never seen the pattern or the spell before. So I'm pretty sure the first time I got here, I just game over on this spell. But that's part of the learning process, right? Eventually you'll kind of get used to how these things wiggle around every way, or how these white worms move around. And that's part of the charm of these games, is that you learn how to conquer what seems impossible, right? Cool. So next, I'd like to give some tips for stage sections. So stage sections also often have a lot of small fairies that are low health and they kind of pop as soon as you hit them. So they're called popcorn fairies. There's also larger fairies that hold sunflowers. And it's useful to know what is coming up, especially for enemies that spawn lots of bullets, because the longer you leave something alive, it's obviously going to flood the screen with more bullets, right? So I have an example here from Touhou 13, stage 4. And Touhou 13 is a very good example of this because the game system actually incentivizes killing things quickly. So when you kill things quickly in this game, the enemies drop more spirits, which are used to both increase your trance gauge, and which leads to better score and also more bombs and lives resources. So I do 2 runs of like the beginning of stage 4. One of them I'm less proactive in kind of killing things. And then the second time I'll be more proactive and I'll point out some differences that happen. So here, imminently you'll see a fairy come in the middle of the screen. I take a bit of time right here, this pink fairy right here. I take a bit of time to kill it. You notice like it's firing several waves. When I kill it, another one comes in, so I kind of got two of them. And then next we have these big fairies that fire these kind of spirals. And once again, I'd like you to kind of observe the general density of bullets around me. As I kind of make my way over to kill them. Okay. Alright, now let's do it again, but be super proactive in killing those enemies when they come. And 10 Desires also has a way of rewarding this in that if you kill certain enemies fast enough, the game will actually spawn more enemies that will drop more special resources for you to collect. So here this, the pink fairy imminently coming in, I'm going to kill it super quickly. Middle, left, right, left. So not only did less bullets appear on screen, more fairies were spawned, which gave me more resources. And here you're seeing me kill the sunflower fairies as soon as I can by memorizing when they spawn. And you can note how much less dense the screen is of bullets. There's basically nothing on the screen. So it's a bit of a contrived example, but that's a very helpful stage tip in general. Another thing is that the music, as I mentioned before, the music is very tightly bound to the stage. And oftentimes it's helpful to use the music as a cue to kind of remind you of what is coming next. Next, I like to discuss effective practice. So get and use THPrac. So this is a tool written by ACK, and you can get it at this URL. What it does is it's a mod for the mainline games that enhances their practice mode and allows you to practice specific patterns and tweak anything about the game, basically. So here I have Touhou 10, and I've set it to stage 5, first spell of Sun-A. And here I can actually set the lives, my power, my faith, which is the scoring thing, and everything else about the game, basically. And this is a lot more efficient than using stage practice or full runs, right? Like, let's say you're having trouble in stage 5 or 6. You don't want to play a full 20-minute run just to practice one time the pattern in stage 6. So having effective single pattern practice is very necessary. And as I mentioned earlier, you want to plan which attacks you want to bomb through and which ones you want to dodge through. So having some sort of idea of what you want to do is good, because if you just try to dodge everything, it's very easy to think you can do something and then get hit and die with bombs and stuff, basically. Yeah. So finally, I'd like to discuss, touch on the community. So there's a bunch of places to hang out if you like playing the games. The most prominent one is the Danmaku channel on the Touhou Project Discord. There's also the Fanworks and Chill Discord for fan games, but they have an official Touhou channel. This is where I hang out the most, the official Touhou channel on FNC, so come say hi. Third is the ShrineMaiden.com forums, or also called Maidens of the Kaleidoscope, MOTK. So old school, it's an old school forum. This is a topic for another time, but I think old school forums need to be protected and preserved. So please give it some love too. Finally, some points on being a good, upstanding community member. So first is just don't be a jerk. That kind of is obvious. Second is don't look down on others based on skill. So everyone was a beginner once, and you're also a beginner once, and no matter what you think, there's someone better than you, unless you're in a set of like probably 5 or less people in the world. There is someone better than you. So don't use your skill as a way of like kind of silencing conversation or kind of saying that you're better than someone else. And on the other hand, also, just because someone is like good at the games doesn't mean like their opinion is truth, right? Everyone is entitled to their own opinions about these games. Third is be respectful of other communities. So Touhou is not the first Danmaku STG series. It's not the only one. It's not even the hardest one. There's lots of very difficult arcade shooting games. So just be respectful of other communities. Don't barge into other communities and be like, oh, Touhou is so much harder than this. Like, just is lame or whatever, right? This just reflects poorly on our community. Just be respectful of outside communities. And finally, you're the sole person responsible for your own enjoyment. So often, or not often, but you will run into people that just kind of aren't happy about things. A lot of people will be like, why are you playing this game? Why are you playing the shot type? Why are you playing X? Or why are you doing it this way? And the point is, like, who cares, right? Like, these are video games. They're meant to be played for your own enjoyment, and you should play them how you think they're fun, right? So what goes with that too is like you should not force yourself to play. Like, it should be fun whenever you play. If you ever feel like you're not enjoying it anymore, you should just stop, right? That's okay. All right, so that is the end of my talk. So if you want the slides link and more info, go to my webpage as seen on screen. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this refined or like touched up version of my Touhou Fest 2023 panel. I'm hoping to return to Touhou Fest in 2024. I'll probably do another panel, but probably not this one again. My tentative topic is about like music syncing in the stages of Touhou between the music and the patterns. So look forward to that. Thank you.